Okay, welcome everyone. And thank you for joining this session with us. And I'm delighted to introduce our panelists for today's session titled Future of Careers in Tech. Tech these days, of course, is ubiquitous. Everyone's life is dominated by looking at screens. And we have three people who've graduated from colleges and have done amazing things during college and also beyond. So with much further ado, I'm going to quickly introduce Arpan Bhaumek, who's a student I worked with in 2006-07. So it's been quite a few years already gone by. He did physics at Rice University, and I'm sure there's enough computational stuff that went into it. Also, he also graduated with a PhD eventually post his master's in biophysics. I did visit his lab while I was in Houston, and I didn't understand anything. So pardon my ignorance today as well. The second person, I'll just go alphabetically, is Pratyush Moore. He went to CIS, which is Calcutta International School in Calcutta, and then also attended Yale and US in Singapore with a fantastic scholarship, and also did a semester at MIT, which is interesting. A year or a semester, Pratyush?
Yeah, it was a semester.
Great. And I believe you cracked the coding competition there and you beat the MITians, which is cool. Yeah, we'll talk about that later. And now he works at Google in Munich. And last but not the least, Vibhu Mahendru, the student who graduated from UCLA in 2017. I remember that he did tell me that he initially wanted to do mechanical engineering. And that's what that's what his eyes were set to do. And he has a family background where they do manufacturing of electrical goods and sort of equipment. And it's interesting how he pivoted. He sort of moved to doing econ as a major, and then finally went back to a career in computer science. So without really elaborating more about their lives, I'll let them speak. So Arpan, the first question to you, when I think of careers in tech, typically we advise students that, okay, maybe are you interested in app dev, web dev, or are you interested in, some serious work like AI, ML, and if I don't even know whether they know what it means, or Internet of Things and getting things together, putting robots together to do some tasks, or even augmented reality, virtual reality, game dev, things like that. What do you think is just the general scope of education in figuring out tech?
Well, okay, so I myself have taken a very meandering path to tech, right? Like I came from a background, not necessarily something that like kind of molds you for tech industry, and then I kind of ended up here. But from my general experience, I would say in the sciences and maths, like a lot of things that you learn in college or in grad school kind of are things that the tech industry looks for. So that will also include engineering as well. But a lot of coding experience comes from doing graduate research or taking like courses in computational physics. And so it's not really a CS background as such. So it's not coming from a understanding of like the computer science concepts that developers on, but more on kind of a general understanding of programming, but more from a kind of just experiential knowledge of programming and using it to solve problems. But as you pointed out in all the things you mentioned that are relevant to tech, it's like a huge category, right? So for example, you could be coming from engineering background, going into more application kind of things, going into robotics, or you could be coming from a math or applied math kind of background and going into things like data science and machine learning, or you could become a CS background and going into development heavy stuff. So it kind of, the entry points are different, I think, for those different parts of tech industry. But even my own personal experience, I would say like there can still be exceptions to that, because
Got it.
to come from a physics background and then become a techie, right?
So tell us more about that. When you sort of continued to pursue your master's and PhD, there were computers involved
Right.
even while you were studying biophysics. So tell us a little bit about what you had to learn and apply during your
Sure.
academic career.
So I did a bachelor's in physics, right? And so there are broad two ways you can do physics. Either you can do experimental, so you're like running experiments in a lab, setting up experiments and that kind of stuff, which there's a lot of variety in, or you could be doing a more theoretical kind of physics, where you kind of, it's more about creating models for systems, solving them, finding different types of dynamics and like, so the use of programming is slightly different in both cases. I would say theoretical physics pushes you more towards programming, and it's kind of a self-taught journey. Like I took some courses in computational physics, which kind of, we go over like CS basics, like, you know, what are classes, what is a function, and like how your design architecture should be and all that kind of stuff. That's never has been the way I learned programming. It's more about, here's a problem, how do you write a code to solve it? And if you go into experimental physics, there the focus is slightly different. You're mostly kind of using specific software to kind of analyze your data. So you'll be focusing a lot more on data and data cleaning and understanding particular applied systems than you would in theoretical biophysics or theoretical physics. So I learned very early in my physics bachelor that I'm not good at labs. Like I'm terrible with my hands. I could not laser if my life depended on it. So I enjoyed like mathematics more. So I shifted towards theoretical physics. And like I think I wrote some of the solar corona. That was my like senior project. And then I was trying to go into astrophysics and try to, I don't know if you remember, like I had gone into college looking for an astrophysics bachelor's, but I switched to physics first year. And then by the end, my interest in astrophysics was like kind of back, and I was trying to go into physics, but in academia, one of the things you'll run into is funding issues, who's doing what project, and it can really mess up your plans. That was when I was kind of looking for computational heavy fields that I could work on within physics, and that's how I ended up in biophysics. And even there, like all of my coding has been, majority of it has been self-taught, and keeping up with new technologies is kind of like a simulated kind of thing. And there were definitely, like I realized in graduate school, I had concerns about coding that nobody else in the field kind of cared about, like kind of like code duplication, and like 10 people working on the same project will have 10 versions of the code, and it's like that would bother me, but no one in academia really cares about that, at least in physics. And so those were the kind of attitudes I developed in graduate school, which once I started looking for jobs, it made sense for me to go into software development, because I already had those kinds of concerns that software company people are always looking at.
Super. Yeah, I think that kind of gives a fairly non-traditional path to understanding how you teach yourself how to code and apply it in academia and subjects like physics, biophysics, even astrophysics. So that's fantastic. Pratyush, about you next. Of course, you had a much more direct path, I'm assuming, to CS. You went and sort of decided, I remember during your high school days too. How was it like at ELNUS and then MIT and everything else?
Well, yeah, first, I actually wasn't decided when I went into college. I knew I wanted to do something with science, but I didn't know what. In fact, I think a few years before college, I took this coding course, right? And I absolutely hated it. I decided I'm not going to never going to do computer science in my life. So I actually went into college not thinking I was going to do computer science. I was thinking more along the lines of physics. And what happened was I took this intro course because it was mandatory for everyone to take. And I realized that coding or computer science is not really about um, just writing some code that you don't really understand, like what is this word, right? What does it mean? But rather about solving a problem in a way that a machine can understand. And that was really exciting to me, and that's how I decided to major in it. I still think my CS education was probably quite different because I didn't go to a engineering school, right? I went to a liberal arts college. And for me, actually, that's been really useful because something that people often discount, but is really true in industry, is that you're not always just coding or looking at technology, right? You're working with teams, you're writing documents, you're reading a lot because there's only so much you can learn in 4 years. Most of the things you learn are outdated by the time you're working, like 2 years into your job, right? And so you have to keep learning. And I think those are some of the key things that I learned and that any liberal arts education focuses on, which are, how to teach you how to learn anything easily with caveats, but and how to, get better at writing and just things that are, I think, transferable across many different industries. And so I think those things are very important in tech as well. And even if you go the non-direct route, those will be useful, right? I mean, as Arpan mentioned, the things he learned doing a science major were still very useful because at the core of it, computer science is problem solving. And if you're getting that knowledge, then you're already working towards a good tech background.
That's great. I think how liberal arts colleges help you reimagine what different options are in store for you, and just making you learn how to learn. That process is really useful. And switching to Vibhu, because you went to a large public university, which probably has a very different approach to education compared to a tiny Yale and US class. How was it like entering mechanical engineering and then flip-flopping and then finally doing CS at another academy after you graduated? So walk us through your journey pretty quickly, and we can hear it.
Hey guys, Vipul here. Thanks for having me and the other panelists on for this discussion. So really quick on my background, I studied science in 11th and 12th. I've always been someone who likes to create things, work with my hands, whether it was, painting or playing instruments, etc. So just having that creativity and get fruition into my life has always been a part of me. So I knew that I wanted to do something in science and engineering. So hence I joined UCLA as a mechanical engineer, and then a couple of years into it, I realized I didn't see myself working as a mechanical engineer. And at the same time, what was happening is that UCLA gave me the ability to take a bunch of other classes as well, which were like your non-major classes. And having not studied economics in 11th and 12th in school, that was really interesting to me as well. I remember some of the behavioral economics courses were just fascinating. And so I decided to switch majors to econ. So I think by the end of college, I was left with science and this economics background. And just like how Pratyush also mentioned, that kind of having a mixed bag of skills can sometimes be useful. And I also definitely see I have entrepreneurial ambitions as well. So at my current job, which is I work as a full stack developer, I often notice that some of the joys that I get at my job is also not just in coding and making the app work, but it's also in thinking how can we make these features better. So yeah, that's a quick background on myself. And how I got into coding was, so I did try a couple of CS classes at UCLA, which was a great introduction. And then post UCLA, I did a 3-month software development bootcamp, which that I think that market has really grown in the last 5 years, where they taught us front end and back end development, JavaScript, Rails. I've since learned Django. So yeah, I think really my learning for CS began at that software development bootcamp. But I've also realized since that YouTube and just the internet at large has been a great mentor. Stack Overflow, I'm sure everybody over here is familiar with it. I think that everything I know about CS can be learned for free from the internet, and just making projects, coming up with an idea for an app or a website, and just diving straight into it. I think that's been one of the biggest ways that I've learned CS.
Super. So I think this, you introduced the word full stack developer and say software engineer. Pratyush, again, going back to you, of course, at Google, you'll have many software developers, even product managers, doing many different things. What do you think, linking it to my first question, when we sort of put buckets into different types of computer science applications and coding that students learn, what is the future of tech education? Since Vibhu also did an alternate path and did a boot camp, and then companies run their own boot camps before they put you on the floor. What do you think is the future of education in tech in particular?
Yeah, that's a very hard question. But I'd say, again, it's not so different from what I mentioned, right? As you see, there are so many new technologies that come up every day, and something that you learn in college today is very likely to not be used when you're out of college and actually working. And so it's most important that any CS student or any student really who wants to go into technology has the ability and the will to keep their skills up to date. And I think colleges can go a long way in helping achieve that, right? Like the assignments that you give, or the lectures that you have, they can be structured in a way that enables people to learn on their own. And as long as you're doing that, I think it's gonna be good. Of course, education is kind of like building a fence, right? Like you kind of want to cover all your bases, but then you also want to start, building in height. And someone once told me that, you want to get some knowledge in many areas, but then you want to get more knowledge in some areas, right? And so colleges can also enhance their curriculum to provide, some intro level knowledge in certain areas, and then people can do a survey of that and then go deeper into the ones they really care about. That could be interesting as well. Of course, it's not mutually exclusive, but both of them.
Just to remind all participants, you can use the chat feature to ask questions. I've been seeing that some of you have been using it, so that's great. And some of the questions are common, like how do we figure out career pathways? That syncs very well with my next question, which was essentially about what you really do at work and typical day at work. Arpan, you're at MathWorks. If in one sentence you could tell us what MathWorks does and what is your typical day like, that would be great.
Okay, so MathWorks basically makes software for engineers and scientists. So like our two flagship products are MATLAB and Simulink. So if you go into a science engineering degree, you're like 9 out of 10 cases you will run into MATLAB or Simulink, and very likely you'll run MATLAB. And that's like kind of what I did my like research and all my learning in computational physics and all that was all based in MATLAB. So basically that's like the flagship products for our company. And as far as my kind of responsibilities go, it's so my title is like basically a quality engineer, right? And a lot of people in software, when they think of a QE, they'll think of kind of like quality assurance, kind of interactively making sure your product is working the way it should. It's slightly different the way we do at MathWorks, where we're basically another software developer. So I get to basically run automated tests. I get to question the developers as to why they're doing something, how it matches what our clients want, how it things both like our shipping products as well as our internal tools. So and most fun that I have is basically finding flaws in software and creating work for my developers. That's yeah. So like we kind of have this kind of sunlight test policy where everything is open. So I get to like kind of ask questions not just from my team but other teams as well, like why they're doing something certain way, like what uh, issues or obstacles the user is facing that they're trying to solve. So it's actually very kind of open-ended. It's very broad, and it's kind of one of the reasons I enjoy my job. It's kind of I'm constantly learning new things and expanding the things, like applying my thought process to a bunch of different things. Yeah,
great.
we cover C++, we cover MATLAB, we cover JavaScript and Java. So all these languages I kind of get exposed to and on the job.
Great. Pratyush, what about you? Google is ubiquitous. MATLAB is obviously well known in university circles and students and Simulink. But tell us more about life at Google and in your department.
Yeah, sure. I mean, right now, it's mostly me just staying at home and, looking at the screen, I guess. But even then, I think there's a variety of things I do. So I'm a software engineer at Google, which means I help develop the products, which hopefully some of you use. I guess on a day-to-day basis, of course, I'm coding a considerable amount, but you can't just be coding. You need to know what you're coding, right? And in order to arrive at in order to realize what you want to code, you need to first look at a problem, design a solution, get input from others, and then once you have something that most people think is solid, you can go ahead and start implementing, and that's where the coding comes in. So I think on a day-to-day basis, I would be reading up a lot about what's new, like what's good for this, what are some good technologies I can leverage to solve a particular problem at hand, and then I would write a doc outlining my thoughts and ask people to review it, approve it, comment on it, and then after that I can start coding. So ideally, you have a mix of all of this in your day, so that you're not doing too much of one thing, because then I think productivity drops. And yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, about living in Munich, and also the fact that many more students are now considering non-typical education destinations. And I know I was meaning to ask you this a little later, but we could quickly maybe get to that. Being in Germany, obviously there must be people who are German working at Google, and they have not gone and studied in the US, UK, Singapore, etc. What are the few good names of institutions you know of in Germany? And in very quickly, how does an international student who doesn't know German apply to those schools?
Right. So again, my knowledge in this area is limited, so take everything I say with 3 pinches of salt. But in Munich itself, there are a few really well-known universities. I think for technical education, the Technical University of Munich is a really well-known name, not just in Munich, not just in Germany, but even beyond. And we have a lot of people from there at Google as well. There's another university called the Ludwig Maximilian University, and that's less focused on tech, but also really good, especially if you're interested in things like economics or other subjects. So yeah, I think those two are the ones I know about, and definitely I think going to the US is not a necessity. I mean, the reason, for example, Google and many other companies have offices all around the world is because they realize that there is talent in other parts of the world, right? And you can't have all of them in the States. Not all of them want to go to the States, in fact, right? Because there are a lot of things they don't like about the States. And so, yeah, like a lot of this talent is in other parts of the world because they studied there or they lived there. And so it's definitely not a requirement to go to the States, I would say, if you want to work at even a company like Google.
Super. Yeah, Vibhu, would you like to add something to the whole jobs thing as to what your day is like, and very quickly tell us what you've been learning recently?
Sure. So really quickly, I work at a company called, it's a startup called Quartic.ai. We're an Industry 4.0 company. We make manufacturing processes more efficient through machine learning. I work as a full stack dev here. My day-to-day would can include things like working on previous bugs, just bugs show up in every software, fixing those. And then we have at any given point one or two new features that we're about to release. So just development on those features. So that can go on for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, depending on what we're trying to build. A lot of engineering docs, as Pratyush was mentioning, like writing docs on what we're trying to do. And and also asking a lot of questions about why or how our platform can be useful, right? Given that this is our product is used by some very like subject matter experts, right? The people who are actually in these factories making vaccines or at mining companies, like they're the ones who really get value out of this product. So just trying to understand how our product can be used, and then trying to correlate that with why we're trying to code what we are, and then coming up with ways to maybe better this feature or a new feature down the line. Yep. So that's a day in the life.
Sure. Super. So we'll move to pretty much the final section, and then we'll open for Q&A, or we'll read out the Q questions. Of course, there are several students who are in high school who are part of this panel. There are a few parents I see who are also online. For a student who's applying and aspiring to go to good schools for tech, which have not just CS, but in general engineering, what do you think they should do in this day and age to sort of stand out in a very competitive selection process? Who would like to go first? Maybe Pratyush?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I could go first. Well, I think the first thing to realize is, or well, before that, first thing to decide is if you are sure, right? If you want to do tech, and let's say you are sure, then there are some things I guess you could do. But what people need to realize is that you often think of tech as this isolated, self-sustaining entity, but it's not, right? I mean, tech is used in every field, and increasingly going to be used in more and more fields, right? And so think of something that you really care about, and think of how you can apply technology to that, right? And once you have that, maybe try to build a prototype. And that's, if nothing else, is going to give you a good story. And as Arjun would probably tell you, colleges love stories. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, for me, a good way, like, because number one, you're working on something you care about, so that's already a win. Number two, you'll get to learn new technologies, which is hopefully what you want to do if you're interested in technology. And number three, you get a good story, which is a side product of all these things. So yeah, I think that's something that would be good.
So we've had students who've done internships, sort of got their feet wet in the industry while in high school, or even early in high school. Some of the very precocious coders, let's just say, I've worked with in the past. They've won competitions. They've represented India in, say, Google I/O, having cleared the Google code in. They've worked with professors on interesting projects, trying to change something about the world. So yes, kids these days are doing a lot, and luckily we do have a team, and it's interesting to be able to work with such bright kids and connect them with not just our team members who have engineering and tech background, but also our past students. So this is one of the forum which would be useful. What about you, Arpan? You probably are the granddaddy because you've done the PhD. You probably get this question from many students over the years. How do I get into a good school if I want to be an engineer? What is your uh, no holds back kind of answer for them?
I mean, I don't know how much to engineering, but like kind of to add on to Pratish, like follow your curiosities. Like, you know, if you're something, learn more about it, uh, try to understand it. And in terms of just like coding or doing projects on your own, two things that I personally find helps me get things done better is one, like keeping it kind of public, like let people get feedback, and also working with other people who are interested in that. So you work in a team. Because at least for me, like working on a, I'll kind of get stuck in a whirlpool of just self-doubt or like integrity that I don't need to get stuck on. And having a team and having getting feedback definitely helpful. As far as getting into a college you want, like I feel I kind of remember things you had consulted with me advice on, and maybe I'll just repeat those. It's basically like kind of like one of the things I remember I had to work on when I was kind of branding myself. Like why do I want to kind of get into this one particular field, physics or astrophysics? Like what interests me in it? Kind of that is important. And I think I mean I've seen a lot of your students are they're at a much better footing than I was. I kind of 11th, 12th, I was really focused on just my CBSE stuff and just doing that. But people now, like kids are doing all these different kinds of projects and keeping up with research, and that kind of thing really is amazing when you're applying to colleges. Like if you've already worked on some kind of project, that's a huge plus point. The other thing is, I remember when I was applying, I had kind of looked at the departments I was interested in for different colleges, research they do, and kind of reaching out to the professors there. That is, I think, another thing that can kind of help you stand out when you're applying. Like I remember you telling me,
yep.
so
Yeah.
I'll just repeat you.
That's great. You have a good memory. Vibhu, what about you?
Yeah, so for students who will be entering college, I think one thing that is one mantra I've had for myself for a while is that if I see something cool, I want to do it. Right, and I've applied that to music, art, education, and CS. So I would say that if you see something, or if you have an interesting idea or like something that interests you, just go ahead and build it, right? Like and for example, if it's like you want to work with some Arduino stuff, you want to make some, if robotics interests you, if machine learning or data science is of your interest, like there are resources out there for you to just get right into it. And one thing I want to say is like that is a very quick way to communicate your technical skills to someone is showing them your portfolio of what you've built, right? And that's something that once you apply like this, if you're working on something that interests you, right? So it's going to be very easy and natural for you to talk about it. It'll be easy for you to write a story about it if you want to use that for your college admissions stuff. And then as well as like communicating to a potential job employer, right? Like if you can show someone that, hey, look, play with this app that I made, or look at this project that I've made, right? Like I think that's way more powerful than any resume. And to give you some more context, like when I was applying to this company, more so than my resume, they asked me, show us what you made. What have you, is there anything on Heroku that you've deployed, or any other app that you've built? And I think that's it's fun. You're coding, you're learning, and it's easier for you to come up with stories when you've gone through like an exciting process like this, and yeah, it helps out in interviews, etc. as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think you've answered one of the questions that has come in, and it was more directed to Pratyush, but I think, yeah, your answer sort of helps. The question was, what advice would you give high school students who are interested in computer science and math? I think it could be directed to anyone. We've covered a bit of that, like try internships, do projects, and things like that. Anything else to add, Pratyush?
No, I think all three of us added pretty interesting viewpoints. And
sure, of course, there are online high school college summer programs these days too, so those could be useful depending.
I think one thing I would say is, like, don't forget to have fun. That's the main part. Like, I think often we're trying to do this and trying to build something to get into college, but if you take all the fun out of it, you're never gonna be able to enjoy the process. So don't forget.
Yeah, exactly. I think the whole element of personal branding sounds so kind of made up, but the idea was to really enjoy and represent who you are. And if it has a name, it is not a great name, marketing sounding name, but yeah.
One thing, actually, Arjun, a quick sentence I want to add. There is also, and this applies to me personally as well, is like, you don't have to have won competitions and may come up with like several breakthroughs in computer science to be part of this industry and to enjoy being part of this industry. So again, like, don't take too much pressure on yourself. You don't have to have gotten like several awards to actually pursue this. You can still do this is all I wanted to add.
Sure, great. There's one question about ROI. It sounds more like a parent question, but no, it's a student I really know well. And I think I know where it's coming from, given that the world's changing so quickly. It's interesting that Prakhar is asking this. And here you are two examples of people who studied in the US and are now back in India, whereas Pratyush, you are not. The question is, does it make sense to spend so much money if you have to come back to India and work? Does it all add up in terms of financing? Arpan, I think you had a pretty long route and you have a fairly senior level position, so I guess you still should be okay. Vibhu, I know it's early days in your career in tech, but how do you or your parents justify?
So that's a good question. Like, I think my parents will be able to answer that better about the ROI. I think when you go to college, and I'll just talk about UCLA, is that I don't think you're just paying for the education. You're not just paying for the classes, right? You're paying for that entire experience, which I really valued. I'm really grateful that I was able to have that. That's really a decision for the individual to take, whether it makes sense for someone to invest in this kind of a 4-year degree or not. But I want to add to this is that tech is a great field to be in. A lot of my friends who have stayed on in the US, who are working as developers or just in the STEM field, like I would say their starting salaries are quite respectable. Even if you were to come back home, I'm happy that I'm doing what I'm doing, and I think these skills are given how COVID is, etc., like remote working, remote monitoring, etc., is just like on the rise. So having tangible skills like this can stand to benefit. I'm not saying like this is the only thing that anybody can do, or is being in tech is the only valuable asset one can possess moving forward. But I'm happy that I'm doing what I'm doing in CS now. Yep.
Okay, maybe great. I can add a small part to that. I don't know if this is like regarding technology, because it just says generally study in the US, but I'm going to answer based on technology. So, I mean, it's a question about how you, I guess, define ROI, right? Like, is it just monetary or is it not? And also, it's a question on like about like how much time frame you're looking at, right? So for example, if you come back, you study tech in the US, you come back in a few years, yes, you would make back the money, but you would definitely not make as much as you would in the US, right? In terms of monetary or in terms of numbers. And that's just how it is. Like, no matter the company, a person who studied in India got hired in India. Well, not, it depends on the company, but most big companies, if you studied in India, got hired in India versus studied in the US, got hired in India, your pay is not going to be very different unless you got hired in the US first and then transferred midway. Then it could be different, but also unlikely.
Got it. That's Arpan, for you, I think you probably are hiring young engineers and you've seen many more years in general in academia as well, and now in industry. What is your take on how to look at investments in education?
Right. This, I think you kind of pointed at this as well. Like, how do you, like, if you're just monitoring, like, how much money did I put in, and how, I think that's kind of a misleading way of looking at it, because what value create for you the education in US is what you about. Like, how many more opportunities is it opening for you? Like, how is you as a and person to be able to deal with the changing world? And I think there's a lot of value there in an education in the US that is still kind of lacking in higher education in our country. The other thing you kind of need is like, at least for me personally, given like scholarship that I got and everything, like, I've already made back in graduate school what I put into undergrad. Right? So it really depends on like how you kind of take the opportunities that you are presented with. That should always be on your mind. And when going to college, like when accepting college, it's definitely considering like how much is this education, like how expensive is it, like going to a public school versus private schools. Difference getting an undergrad degree from a really expensive private school versus a public school, and these are things that you should definitely look at. But you lose out a lot. I think you kind of gain by studying abroad and then coming back and working in India or wherever you work. Like I in like when I was doing interviews in India, I would get frequently asked like, why did you come back? And it was always with a tone of like, why would you do that? And it doesn't make sense to me, because even though like in magnitude of money you're making less, like I'm making less in India than I would be in the US or somewhere else. But you also have to look at kind of like quality of life and how much freedom I have in my own country, and what kind of things do. So it's not just about the exact amount you're making. Like, what do you do with that amount?
Sure. Great.
What kind of joy do you get out of it?
Super. I think there's similar themes covered by all panelists. It's really about finding your purpose, finding your calling, and international college education can sort of give you another view. Okay, so moving forward, there are more questions. I think more like a affirmation by a parent. I think education is meant to expand your brain, not your wallet. I like the last line. How will you get ROI depends on what you do in life. That's great. So that sums it up. I know there are a few questions which are typical, like, should I take higher level this, or, along with this, should I do a math and physics, HL? Again, there's no one answer. There are different universities in different countries which have certain requirements. So it's very hard to give a blanket answer. Once we explore your choices and help you choose your IB courses in particular, because many students are currently confused, they are moving to IB. just finishing 10th grade. So happy to do that offline and discuss. There are also questions about specific projects and internships which students typically could do in CS. Happy to share kind of paragraph notes on some of the recent projects our students have done, and also walk you through how those were completed. So feel free to connect with me after this session. Fine. Arnav, who's just joined, he's saying that I'm a beginner coder and I need to do more with it, I guess. He's not completed his whole sentence yet, but yeah, I think that's what he's talking about. And another question is, continuing his question is, how much do projects that I've already completed count, I'm guessing, and how much of those, how else can I extend them, I guess. So I'll encourage you to complete as many projects if you have the time and you're enjoying it, and don't burn out. So we'll have to see. Another question from Kyra. As all of you are working in respective companies, do you feel the new engineering skills are also developing in the field you're all part of? I feel we've covered that, but maybe I'm missing something. If someone's got something to say, because I know, Kyra, you've asked this question twice on the chat. I'm not sure if we've not answered it. Anyone? You think maybe there's something else you want to add to this answer?
Can you just repeat that question, please?
Yeah, so Kyra's question is, as all of you are working in respective companies, do you feel the new engineering skills are also developing in the field you all are part of? So something new that's happening, which I feel we've answered it, but since you were asking it twice, then I thought maybe there's something else that we could add. Pratyush, I think you summed it up quite well, but Vibhu, if you want to add something, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give a use case
example, maybe.
Yeah, for my own company, right? So, we really work with machine data, and most of our clients are in the pharmaceutical industry. So, traditionally, these guys have been very reluctant to stream their data over the internet. And it's also FDA. The FDA does not approve of it. So clients have initially like to keep most of this, most of like all the computing that happens on premises, like inside their factories. One thing that's been shifting since last year and now more so than COVID is because remote working is on the rise, and like people want to limit the number of people coming into the factories in the first place, is how can we get some of these computational resources onto the cloud and on the edge. So just one example of, and this transformation has its own set of challenges. So I don't know if that's exactly the question, but yeah, because the needs of some industries are changing, we're having to adopt different technologies to meet those needs.
Sure, great. Super. So there's one question which we've also covered, but just to point it out, does an international education provide an advantage relative to an Indian engineering CS education when working in India? So yeah, Vibhu and Arpan again, do you think it's an advantage? If you were an IITian, did CS and worked in the same company, would it be different?
Arpan, you want to go ahead, take your first crack at it?
Sure. So it's kind of compare something I have experience with something I don't have experience with. So keep that in mind when you hear the answer. But I think, in my own opinion, like what I got from a US education was kind of changing the way I look at things and approach things. Compared with my high school education with what my undergrad education was like, right? It was just like preparing for exams, knowing how to get good grades. So like kind of how to tackle an exam, right? A question paper. That was the goal. Going into undergrad, I kind of had to push to kind of think on my own. this kind of like critical thinking on things that you're not familiar with, and approaching to kind of learn things by critically reasoning about it. This kind of approach I felt was like something that uh, really uh, shined on in like the US education system. Especially like I went in as like a bachelor in physics, right? But I took classes in economics, I took classes in humanities, psychology, philosophy, computer science, like photography, art, like just bunch of like wide range of things, right? And this exposure kind of really affects the way you like look at things and how you approach problems and how you think about things. So that is definitely, I think, for me an advantage, because my job, if you look at it, it's very difficult to say like this is how your degree in physics or biophysics is helping you in the job. It's, I couldn't like really point you to it. What does help is my ability to be critical and skeptical of things and to reason about things and to like have communicate those skepticisms to people, which really was like the holistic approach of the American education that helped me. So that would be my answer on that.
Great. One more question from iPhone, and is about differences in engineering modules versus natural science modules. I mean, and the prior question was, what are the pathways of math and economics jointly? I mean, so two very different questions. So about math and econ, I guess, Vibhu, you could take a stab at.
Sure.
What can people do with math and econ? And if Pratyush and Arpan, if you have something very quickly to add, you can also do that.
Right. So I'm guessing the question is, what does one do with a math or econ degree?
Or a combination of both.
Or a combination of, yeah. So typically, like I would say a large chunk of the people who graduate with these degrees go into finance, and that would mean that can be a range of jobs, from like things like investment banking, trading, equity research, consulting. Yeah, so largely I would say it's finance. If it's just economics, I feel like that's also that can be used in more places too. Like I've seen people with an econ degree go into like business development or and other non-related fields as well. But I would say largely finance seems to be like the hot space to be with these degrees.
Great. Of course, econometrics would include a lot of math. So that could be another area. The second question is difference in engineering modules versus natural science modules. Yeah, this is an interesting question because very often students end up asking this. What is the big deal about engineering? And why can't we just study physics? Like Arpan, you just did physics, whereas few friends, I'm sure everyone, like with who you started off thinking of mechanical engineering. What do you think are the two bigger differences? Arpan, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I'll just speak on the natural science part.
Sure.
More experienced people on the panel talk about engineering. The one thing I would say, okay, so let's talk about like what attracted me to physics. Right? I was good at math in school, but I did not enjoy math because it's very abstract. So physics is like kind of using math to kind of describe the world around you, right? That's what attracted me to physics, and I wanted to. But in general, a natural science education is going to bolster some skills in you, right? It's going to teach you really good mathematical tools, okay, and how to apply them to problem solving. You're going to have statistics that doesn't come from like a statistical background. It's more about kind of analyzing real world data, okay? You're going to learn analytical. If you're doing theoretical stuff, then you're also going to have programming skills, okay? You're going to get, if you are doing natural science in academia, you're going to learn reading and writing skills, like at a really high level, because you're going to have to like read and understand papers and write papers and get those published. So you are like bolster a bunch of different skills that are largely applicable to a lot of different fields. So this is something that I saw, like just in my graduate school, the other people who are doing theoretical biophysics, none of them are actually like very small percentage of them are actually still doing academia, where they're becoming assistant professors or going towards like a tenureship path. Majority of them, like I would say like 80%, are working in like in big technological companies, right? They're working in Google, Amazon, they're working in Facebook, right? And these are people who are writing, doing what? They were doing protein folding. They were like figuring out how cancer cells metastasize. So they were able to transition their programming and mathematical skills into an actual software development job, right? And this is not a rare, happens very frequently if you look at higher degrees in natural science. This is a very common occurrence where people will take their skills and transition into technology and software development, tech, all these different things will open up because of these basic skills that you develop. So there's a lot of advantage to doing that. However, I would also not be doing natural science if you're not interested in natural science, right? The point I'm trying to make is by doing natural science, you're not actually giving up on successful career path is the point I want to focus on. It is actually preparing you very well for a current industry.
Very well said, I think. Vibhu, you'd like to add something about the mechanical engineering route, and quickly then we can move to the last question and close.
Right. So I can't speak for how it compares to like a natural sciences field of study. But yeah, mechanical engineering, the couple of years that I was doing it was first year was just covering your basics. So it was your physics and chemistry and math courses. Your second year you start being introduced to lab work, and you actually start to like machining tools yourself. It was another aspect of things. Not sure how it would relate to a natural sciences field of study. But yeah, again, not the go-to guy for getting a full picture for
so the labs and the intro to engineering courses will obviously be very different.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yep. Super. There's a question which is for Pratyush, but it's more about destinations for education: Germany, Singapore, Europe, and all that. But we can combine it with the next question, actually, which Arnav is asking again. His question is interesting. He says that, fine, we know education abroad is expensive, but how about planning it a little ahead, micromanaging it, I think, a little bit. What he's trying to say is that if I know that I might not be able to get a great job in the Silicon Valley, but if I think the cost of living in Texas, for that matter, or some other country is lower. I know he's thinking far ahead, but what advice would you give them? What is recommended, considering I have student loans to pay?
So, yeah, this is very hard to answer generally, right? I mean, it's such a individual question, and I think you would probably be the better person to answer this, considering the specific background, right?
Right?
Yeah, it's very hard to answer in generics, but I could answer the Singapore education versus perhaps U.S. education. I've never studied in Germany, so I won't speak to that, but I've studied in the US and Singapore. I think, initially I applied to the US and Singapore, and at the end, my Singapore option was the best one, and I chose that. And I think that was one of the best decisions I ever made, because, in so many ways, there's so much happening in Asia, right? Like, you go to Indonesia, which is a 1 hour flight from Singapore, and every time you go there, it's totally different. Or even Malaysia or Thailand, Philippines, right? And so being in that region, being in Southeast Asia was amazing, right? And I got a really international exposure. I think before I went to college, I traveled to maybe one country outside the subcontinent. After I left college, so when I graduated from college, it was like 23. And much of that was through college programs, and they helped me out with funding. They helped me out with the program. Going there with someone who's really deeply knowledgeable about a particular region was great. So I'd say it's less, the location is one factor, but also the course is really important. So look at courses and see what course fits you best, right? And that's generally going to lead to a good decision. I think some things to consider when you think of location are things like visas, right? If you go to the US, because of the OPT, you'll be able to work there for at least, let's say if you do tech for 3 years. The same is not true if you go elsewhere, right? So those are things you should consider. And also, yeah, like location-specific personal considerations. But in terms of courses, there are certainly good courses in Singapore as well.
Great. So I think that brings us to the close. We also have one of our old students. So Kanish, thanks for joining. It's been really interesting with your comments and kind of recommendations. Also, just to make some housekeeping notes, we'll keep an audio recording of this available in case someone wants to request. Second is we trying to do many more online and virtual meetings with our students, so feel free to schedule. Third is we have an interesting opportunity to connect and do an AMA with directors and vice president level people from universities in the US. So that's kind of very, very new. Not many people offer to do that. So these are people at the top of their game in universities who will be sparing 25 minutes, 30 minutes at a time. Even if you have, if you're in the 9th grade or 10th grade, it's all right. If you want to have a quick chat, just let me know. I'll be sending out an email which will be titled AMA with admissions officers. So keep an eye out for that. We do have a session next week, and 3 liberal arts colleges. One is Claremont McKenna, Pomona, and the third one is Harvey Mudd. They're part of the 5 Claremont colleges. They will be presenting on Friday night, our time, and I'll moderate that discussion. So I'll send out an email about that as well. If you're not a part of our mailing list, go to our website and just sign up on our contact page, and we will add you. Anytime you want to unsubscribe, you can always do that. Fine, I think, thank you, Arpan, thank you, Pratyush and Vibhu, for a fantastic evening conversation. Looking forward to seeing you face to face sometime. Yeah, all the best.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Thank you very much
Thanks for having us.
for letting me be a part of this. Yeah.
Bye, Vibhu.
Bye, guys. Thanks for having
Thanks,
me.
guys.
Bye, everyone. Bye.